Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Little Wonder leaf blower. It is powered by an 8-horse Briggs & Straton engine and unfortunately was thrown in the trash. My friend Jason pulled it out, so I don't know the history on this machine. But given that it's early fall and the leaves, they are starting to turn, now would be a good time to get this machine up and running before the peak of leaf season. That said, though, there is one little problem, and that's the engine. I did try to turn it over, and unfortunately, it is locked up solid. So I don't know if it ran out of oil, potentially water got in the cylinder, or maybe it's an easy fix. But the goal today is going to be to get this machine up and running again. So let me get you set up a little bit better. We'll get this up on the lift and figure out what the problem is. All right, first things first, let's check the oil. Make sure we didn't run out. These engines are usually pretty tough, and as long as you keep oil in them, usually you'll do all right. So there is oil in there. You can see it kind of splashing around. It is a little low. It should be right up to the last thread, but that amount of oil should be fine. Let's just check the viscosity. Seems pretty good. And it does not smell like fuel, so I don't think it ran out of oil. Or if it did, someone may have topped it off after it was too late. So the throttle cable, it is broken. I'm not going to worry about that until we know kind of what's going on with the engine. So I'm going to pull the plug next and just see if there's any rust. It is on there pretty tight. And no rust at all. Maybe running a little lean. But that's a good sign. So the piston likely isn't stuck due to rust in the cylinder. We have oil in the engine, so theoretically this engine should rotate. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to get a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil down there, and I'm going to pull the starter recoil off, actually the whole blower housing. That way we can try to rotate the flywheel, rock the engine back and forth and see if this thing is going to free up. One possibility, too, is that we have a stuck valve. And if the valve was stuck and someone pulled the engine over, as soon as the lifter tries to push the valve up and couldn't, the engine would no longer rotate. So that would be kind of best case scenario. And by taking that blower housing off, we can rotate the engine backwards and see if it moves in either direction. That looks pretty clean in here. There's no sign of a critter nest. The coil. Oh. Hey, look at that. So it turns backwards, and if you turn it forwards, it comes to a hard stop, and it actually sounds like it's coming from the fan side of things. So that is good news. You know, likely the engine is fine, but there is an issue going on in here. So instead, let's get these bolts off. You know, this cover can come out of place, and then we can get a look inside to see what the obstruction is. So nothing obviously stuck in the fan, although now it's actually stuck again in both directions. Let me try rotating it. Oh, there we go. So the noise, it does sound like it's coming from this area. And actually, I think this fin might be stuck on that bolt. And the bottom fin, I would say the bolt down there. So, yeah, I don't think the bolts are sticking out more than they should be. But when I'm actually looking at the side here, you know, it kind of looks like it's dented in. And because of that, it's making contact with these bolts. So I think we need to keep going here. Let's get the bolts going around removed, and that'll remove this plate, giving us even better access so we can check out if this plate is flat. And ultimately, I think the fix here is going to be to straighten this out, or at least move it away so that it doesn't hit the fan. So the plate, it looks halfway decent. I don't see any obvious bends. This is the corner here in question, and the whole plate is sitting down nice and flat. So the plate, it's not the problem. And that is a better look at the problem here. So this fin is right up against this plate, and the other side has a 1/4 inch gap. So it's actually hitting that bolt, and if I rotate the engine the other way, the fin starts rubbing right about here, and then it's stopped by that bolt. So we are missing about a 1/4 inch of clearance on this side. So just checking here with the tape measure, the good side, we're just shy of 5 inches. And if I look here on the problem side, we're actually a little bit less than 4 1/4 inches. So that is the problem. This side for sure is a 1/4 inch too far in, and that needs to come back out. So, you know, as far as I can tell, the bend is right kind of in this area. At least that's kind of the focus of it. And if you look at it from the side, you can kind of see that as well. Again, it's very subtle. But in this area, it's definitely pushed in. So what I'm going to try to do is use this jack to push it out. You know, it just barely fits in, but it does fit. So what I'm going to do first is actually remove these two doors to just get a little bit better access. We'll position the jack the best we can, push out, and try to get that 1/4 inch back. And the real reason I need to get these doors off is because this one goes in really far, and it's actually raised off of the piece that we're trying to straighten out. So If I put the jack in there and start pressing, I'm likely just going to damage this flap. So we'll get it out of the way to prevent that. There's just 2 bolts holding it on. I think it'll come right out. All right, we'll give this a go. The jack, it's gonna push kind of right in this area. The face of the jack, I'd say starts right there where the bolts are and ends right about there. So I'll bring up the pressure slowly. And I do see stuff moving. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, we're getting there. We've gained about 1/8 of an inch. We need 1/4. But even at 1/8, we do clear those bolts now. So technically this would work as is, but the clearance is still super tight. So let's keep pushing, in this area right here and try to get a little bit more clearance. All right, and that did it. So now we are just a tiny bit less than 5 inches, just like the other side. So now we should have plenty of clearance between the fan and the bolt, as well as the housing. And we can now rotate the engine and have no interference with the fan. So I would say the fan problem is solved. So let's shift gears back to the engine and see where that's at. So I've got the starter recoil back on, and I want to check the basics here, starting with spark. So we're going to use this tester to see if it can jump the 1/4 inch gap. So let me get you situated. We'll kill the lights. And keep an eye on this right here. Okay, good. We have strong spark, no issues jumping that 1/4 inch gap. So let's check the compression, see where that comes in at. Now, ideally, we would see 120 psi, but engines like this, they usually have a decompression system. So, 60 psi plus or minus about 10 psi is the best I think we're going to see. So let's pull it over and see if we have any compression. The engine felt pretty good pulling it over. Compression comes in at 75, so yeah, likely we have a compression release. So I think we'll be fine as far as compression goes. The plug that came out of there, it was an NGK BR4LM. And I'm sure this plug still works, but I just double checked if this was the correct plug for this machine. And originally it would have come with a Champion RJ19LM. And this is actually a Hutter plug. The plug they used is essentially the same as far as the form factor goes, but this is a cooler plug and not the right one for the engine. So we're going to put a brand new RJ19LM. Well, I'd say things are looking up on this machine. When I turned the camera on, I had a locked up engine and no spares to take its place. So I kind of thought this was going to be a teardown video. And apparently the last owner thought this was hopeless as well, which is why it ended up in the trash. But now we do have an engine that rotates. We have spark and compression. Likely we do have timing. Fuel is usually a problem, but this one, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt because the tank, it is actually clean and dry. And there is no smell of fuel in there. Not to mention the oil looked pretty clean, and the plug that we pulled out, although not brand new, was not the original plug that came with the engine. So definitely someone has been maintaining this machine, and I'd say there's a good chance they stored that carburetor correctly. So I'm going to top off the oil, and we'll double check the air filter, and if everything looks good, then I'm going to feed the carb some fuel. We'll pull it over, see if this thing shows any signs of life. And assuming this runs, I'm going to change the oil and clean it up a bit. But there's no sense in doing that. For all I know, the engine knocks. And that's it. So we weren't too low on oil. All right, let's have a look in the airbox, make sure that everything looks good. And yeah, we've got a filter. Paper filter looks really good. Pre-filter's not biodegrading, although it is a little moldy. But that should be more than adequate to run with. So one thing worth noting here too, which I don't think a lot of people know this is the pickup for the air. And in cold weather, you turn it like this. So it actually picks up warm air from the exhaust and it keeps the carburetor from freezing up. If it's not below freezing out, then you don't need to do that. It's actually bad because the engine's going to run hotter than it should. So I'll keep it pointed away from the exhaust. The throttle plate is not stuck. That is a good sign. And neither is the choke. Now I'm going to pull the fuel line right from the carb. The fuel line is a little bit petrified, so we might have to replace that at some point. We're definitely going to have to replace it after I'm done with it. is it is really stuck on there, so I'm likely going to rip the line, trying to get it free. It's moving. Okay. And no fuel on the line, another good sign. All right, so we'll get this line rigged up. And we're going to have to be careful with this one because the exhaust is right above. So when I fuel this up, you got to be careful we don't drip any fuel onto that exhaust. Actually, before we try starting it, there is one more thing we need to look at, and that's the cable. It is disconnected from the handle, so we can't control the engine speed. And this also doubles as the kill switch. So unless we can throttle it fully down to ground out the coil, we're not going to have any way to shut this down. So I'm going to pull on the other end of the cable. I want to see if this is free to move. And if it is, we'll try to reconnect it to the handle. And no, we're getting very little movement out of that cable. So yeah, reconnecting it, I don't think it's going to give us control of the engine. So instead, I'm going to pull this bolt right here. We'll just get the cable off altogether. And then we should be able to manually control the position of this throttle. Okay, and we do get a range of motion here. So to the right, that's full throttle. And to the left is to shut it down. You can actually see the switch moving there, the contacts, when I move it to that position. So we should have a way to shut it down if we need to. So I'm going to leave it kind of right in the middle. There's no saying it's going to stay that way once the engine starts shaking, but it should be good enough to get us started. So the question is the needle working? We'll find out in a minute if it starts flooding over. And yeah, seems to be working. The flow more or less stopped. The line is right there. It is creeping a little bit, but the needle, it's definitely working. So yeah, let's try to start it. All right, let's give this a try. So the choke is on, fuel is holding steady, and the ignition should be on. Wow, it's gonna start. Let's turn the choke off. Absolutely incredible. I have no idea how long it's been since this engine has run, but it ran like new. You know, it pretty much started up right away, idled perfectly, had no issues revving it up. So the carburetor is doing a very good job. The jetting is pretty much spot on, and the engine sounds great. So this thing, aside from putting it back together, is more or less ready to go, with the exception of the cable. I do need to get a new one of those ordered up. And I think even before I do that, let's get the oil changed while we have some heat in the block. Yeah, not exactly the best spot to access the drain plug. It's kind of blocked by the rail and the carburetor. But it is going to come out. Maybe. So the oil that came out, not quite as new as I thought, but it does look pretty good, all things considered. As far as the cable goes, we've got multiple issues going on here. I guess first off, the bracket that it attaches to, it's actually bent over. Kind of see it a little bit better on this side. So this has to be straightened out. The cable itself clips into there on this end. And then, well, the cable doesn't really move, so I think that is at least partially due to this break and bend down here in the sleeve. So, I think we have enough cable that if I trim the Z-bend off, we trim the damage off, that will at least let us get the cable out. We can get some lubricant inside the sleeve, and hopefully with that damage gone, the cable will free up and we'll have enough left to reattach to the machine. Now there is a through bolt right here that we need to remove to get this bracket off. And this one right here, I'm not sure if it's original to the machine or not. Someone may have added that to help secure it or keep it from turning. Either way, we need to get it off. And this one's pretty loose. Originally, I was just going to replace this with a new throttle control and cable, but the part, it is discontinued. So if I did that, we'd have to put just another random one in its place, which would probably work fine, but I think I'd rather try to fix this one if we can. Yeah, now that it's off the machine, you can see a little better the problem area. There's actually a few problem areas. This is the worst right here. But even where the cable attaches, it looks a little bit bent out of shape, so we might have to fix that up. And even the front here, looks like it's bent out of shape and not quite a 90, which I'm not sure if it's supposed to be. So we can fix that if need be, but let's fix the obvious damage. We'll try test fitting it and go from there. It's looking a lot better. Not perfect, but let's switch gears a bit and see if we can get this issue with the cable sorted out. So I'm going to cut off the Z-bend. Maybe. And try to pull the cable out, which is probably going to be easier said than done, but it does move a little. Okay, we're through. There was definitely some sort of blockage. You know, I built pressure in here and finally it came through. So that was just some WD-40. So let's try getting the cable back in. Actually, I'm going to put this probably right back here. And we'll just try feeding the cable through. Okay, seems to work pretty well. So I'm going to get the handle side back on. And then we'll fit it to the machine and see if it's still long enough to do what we need it to do. So it's too tight of a fit. And one of these tabs here looks a little bit bent out of shape. So I'm going to bend it back, potentially too far back, which is fine. Because once it's in place, I can give this a little squeeze, and that should lock around the cable with any luck. Okay. So we need to add the Z-bend back using this tool right here. It's just two bends. The first bend, in this case, we want to bend away from the engine. Like that. Try to get it close to 90 degrees if you can. We're still a little bit short. And actually, I probably didn't need to put that much wire in there. You know, this cable is kind of short as it is, and that extra we're going to have to actually snip off. So we're kind of shortchanging ourselves a little bit. All right, once you get it at a good 90, you put the tool back how it was, and then you lift up, put it in the slot like that, and bend a 90 now, going the other direction. Like that. And there's our Z-bend. So that is going to go right in there. But I think I do need to shorten this piece just a little bit. So we're going to cut the tip off of this. Cut it, I'd say about in half. You want about maybe 3/16 of an inch left. Kind of like that. And let's try test fitting it. Okay, that seems to be good. So right now the throttle is in the off position. That is full throttle. So we want to set it to off. Slide this to the off position as well, which don't think we're there yet. Actually, yeah, that is the off position. So now we just need to secure the cable, and then we need to start the machine. We need to make sure that we have full control of the engine speed. We can shut it down, and when we put it to full throttle, I want to make sure that we don't exceed 3,600 RPM, or else you could have a catastrophic failure of the impeller. Okay, seems good. So I'm going to connect us up to external fuel, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll get the engine started and just make sure that we have good control of the engine speed. All right, choke is on. We've also connected an inductive tachometer so we can get a read on the engine speed at full throttle. So let's bump the throttle up a little bit. Well, I think we're looking pretty good, as far as the throttle control goes. We were able to start the engine, throttle it up, and even at the max throttle, we were not exceeding 3,600 RPM. We were actually pretty much exactly at 3,600. So the calibration, it appears correct. And of course, we could shut the engine down. So the throttle control, I think it's good to go. So we'll just finish it up. There is a clamp right here that holds the cable in place like that. And we also need to add some lock nuts on these bolts that hold the handle. The one over here actually completely rattled out. And this one's about to fall out as well. These are not the original bolts, and the nuts used were not lock nuts, so they really had no chance of staying on the machine. So we'll get those installed properly, and I think we'll get the rest of the machine together. It looks like originally there would have been 2 bolts in here. And this one's chewed up a little bit, so might put this smaller headed bolt up top. And let me scrounge up something for the other holes. So we get the test line off the machine. And the original line is actually in pretty good shape. It's still flexible, but I did crack it a little bit right on the end. So I'm going to trim that back a little bit. I think we'll have enough to reattach it. Well, the engine, it cleaned up pretty well. There was quite a buildup of oil and dirt over the years. So we are pretty much as clean as we're going to get. Obviously not perfect. There is a bunch of rust, a little bit on the engine. Obviously, the blower has a bunch of rust, but I'm not too worried about it. This machine, it's made of very thick gauge steel. And, if I left this outside for another couple decades, I think the steel left on here would still be more than what you'd get on a newer machine. Plus, to do this right, we really need to pull the engine, which means pulling the fan off the crankshaft, and that is likely very rusted in place, and likely I'm going to cause damage. So I'm not going to pull it off just to make it look perfect and potentially destroy the whole machine. So there's really not a whole lot more to do right now other than wait. The leaves, they are not falling in quantity quite yet. So we'll give it a couple weeks, then we can put it to the test. All right, it's a few weeks later, and at this point, I would say a majority of the leaves are down. Now, I was kind of expecting a little bit more. Usually there is, so I think some of them may have blown away, maybe into the neighbor's yard. And speaking of the neighbor, usually I just blow the leaves on the left side of the driveway into the woods, but I watched my neighbor meticulously clean out the woods between our properties this summer. And if I go that way, I think I might make an enemy. So instead, we're going to do the hard thing and blow all these leaves across the driveway and into the woods over there. Well, I'd say I grossly underestimated just how many leaves are out here. Those missing leaves, I think, had actually blown across the driveway and were kind of piled up over there. So blowing everything out the long way into the woods was a bit of work, but the machine was up to the task. It performed absolutely flawlessly. So, I think we got pretty lucky on this one. Going into it, I thought we had a locked up engine and wasn't sure if we were going to get it running again. But as it turned out, we just had a bit of damage, and once straightened out, this machine came back to life. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.